We gotta send Vibram like an email. Be like, hey, can you work a deal? Like we'll get Vibram to sponsor the Sunday podcast, and then we'll get Vivo, who actually sponsors us, to sponsor the Wednesday podcast.
The difference is the one is the ugly toe things, and the one is the actual good things. Like that's
the one that we're with is the good things.
Yeah, it's not the salty. Can you just imagine what's going on in those things?
My thing is the socks. That's like where the people who wear the toe socks with the toe shoes, like y'all got too much time.
Yeah, wait, can you?
I purposefully got it when I moved here. What I did was I threw out all my socks and I just went on Amazon. I was like, right, these look good. And I bought 30 pairs.
So I did the same for when I left Australia to come here.
Brilliant. But could you imagine like this little piggy goes to every single day?
No.
So we are sponsored by Vivo barefoot shoes. Listeners to the Sunday podcast, all sorts of confusion because you're here in Miami.
Yes.
And on a Wednesday podcast.
Yeah.
And the Wednesday podcast to end all Wednesday podcasts.
Yeah, this could be the one.
I think this is really going to be are they canceled yet? Well,
this is the line. This is the test.
We're trying to find out where the line is. And and it's valuable to know where it is. And the only way you know is by crossing it.
Yeah.
I think it was good. Yeah. I think it'll be a stimulating conversation.
I hope that's the way that
it's the beginning of a joke, really. It's like a Canadian guy, South African guy, and a Jew walk into a bar. All right, before we incriminate ourselves too much, vivobarefoot.com/RX radio promo code
RX'D radio.
RX radio, great. And that's 20-something% off, 20-ish?
20 off the first purchase, yeah.
Yeah. And Australia, the people that you live amongst, the creatures over there down under.
We call it the sick cunts.
The sick cunts, the mad cunts. Wear shoes. Because we know they don't like wearing shoes. Their kids aren't wearing shoes.
I can't handle
increasing amount of needle drugs. Ice is a big thing.
Yeah.
Don't step on hypodermic needles. Vivo. I think that should be a sales pitch. Vivo, hit me up. Actually, you do hit me up. We talk we talk to Nicholas about once a week. Don't get hepatitis. Wear Vivo. Right. It's a jingle now, really more than anything. It's a jingle. So vivobarefoot.com/RX radio, promo code RX radio. Probably had one of the best lower body sessions I've had in a while. They've been in the back of my suitcase since I moved. They look like I'm a big Nike guy. Everyone knows I got a bit of a shoe collection. You also shoe collection. Everyone will be like, look, Blazers are flat. Ones are flat. They're not. You know what? Yeah, and I really like doing. My feet were feeling it today. It was just the walk. The walk and the barefoot was what made the session. I think it's going to have to make a habit. But man, the sorest thing today for me was my feet.
Yeah.
Which is like, that goes to show you, it's the same with like grip strength. Except we can put straps on our hands and we can't get that receptivity. There's nothing that does that like the real deal.
Yeah.
Especially like when I work with athletes and they're sled pushing and pulling on turf, you can't go barefoot.
No.
Have you ever seen the people do the sled stuff where the trainers like going behind them and putting their feet on
so they've got a base to push off.
What are you dancing with the flower girl? Like what the fuck is going on? Just get a pair of Vivos. Don't get hepatitis. Vivo, man. Oh, shit. All right. So Sunday meets Wednesday, and I think we like it.
Yeah.
So vivobarefoot.com, HD muscle. What do you say?
We got the entire cupboard full of it.
We do.
Yeah.
So huge shout out to Dorian, Kathleen, Mariah, Noah, who will actually be back. Fingers crossed he'll be with us. We'll be back in Pure Muscle and Fitness with the gang. They were kind enough to sponsor the podcast. They're kind of like Apple. They don't really go on sale.
No, they don't.
Right? They don't run sales for shit. Like, they're just... It costs what it costs. Today's price is today's price. That was yesterday's price. They're on some American gangster shit, and I respect that about them. But they were nice enough with our relationship, 10% off, and the products top tier. You know what a lot of supplement brands do and have done that they don't do is they always, since the beginning, have used patented ingredients. If you guys, I'm serious. I'm like, if you guys have followed us for any length of time, we don't plug shit that we don't use, and we don't use a lot of stuff because all of it's trash. They've gone out of their way over the time. As you watch other big supplement brands, I'm not going to name names, they come out of the gate hot in their initial marketing push with the patented ingredients like the Crea Pure and the Carnosine and all that stuff. And
super creatine.
oh god, what was that? That was a
Bang,
monster
Bang.
energy.
Yeah.
Ooh. But it's like they come out of the gate hot with all this stuff, and then when no one's looking, they pull the old switcheroo, right?
Suddenly it's 20% less of the
Yeah,
ingredients
yeah.
in there,
And then
up
it's
something else.
right. And so that, with these guys, getting to know them on a personal level, working with them as a sponsored athlete, nothing but great things to say about the products. I mean, right now, our go-to and like we're talking prior to this, we were concoction guys going out like you had and nothing short of like a meth lab in your place.
Pretty much, yeah.
And there was powders and funnels and systems and boiling temperature. It was a whole production. But with that, you just don't have to think about it.
Nah,
you just fucking take 2 scoops, you get it in a water bottle, you get it in your face, and you're fucking sweet. Like no crash, no come down. I still sleep at night as much as I normally sleep.
Oh, we've been doing
Get
pretty
a
well.
strong 4 hours.
In saying that, though, shameless plug, the sleep formula from HD Muscle is top tier.
And that's what I like with the crossover. So Dwayne Jackson obviously teaches the nutrition course, guys. We're just selling shit today. We're just doing it. We're making up for it. The Prescript Nutrition for Body Composition course taught by Dr. Dwayne Jackson.
Which is for sale right now.
Wow, look at that. But wait, there's more. Jesus.
Buy today and get. Yep.
So Dwayne, Chief Science Officer for HD, and also works with us. We actually have some stuff in the pipe with Adil Khan, also on staff. So which
also, I think they do the kidney formula together, which is also really good. If you're in that realm and you're in the bodybuilding realm, the kidney and the liver support from HD Muscle, it's got NAD in it, it's got glutathione, there's milk thistle in there as well, but it's a good top tier formula that you are or should be implementing with all of your athletes, even Gen Pop.
I've seen some crazy blood work change from the liver formula.
Yeah.
I think there's like a broccoli extract in there. Dorian was telling me about it once, and basically the idea is people's have one of the things that the liver does, amongst other things, is it it helps break down estrogen.
Yeah, it goes through phase 2 detoxification pathway,
right,
which is then the breakdown of the estrogen. So it's like that's where it clears through the system, and if it's in that realm, it's like that's going to be one of the things that we want to be working on or trying to clear out.
Because a lot of people just come over the top with like something equally as aggressive on the other side, and that's honestly what does guys in my opinion. It's injuries, guys leading into comp, at least in my powerlifting days, and they're running a lot of gear. It's the aromatase inhibitors that do them in from a musculoskeletal disjunction standpoint. The lipids get fucked.
What people don't understand is like estrogen is extremely important, if not more important than testosterone, in my opinion. It's like we've seen bone density for like estrogen is involved in keeping our bones strong and keeping them healthy from that side. It's the muscle tears, the muscle strains. It's like as soon as you start putting in or adding in supplements, if you want to, from that side, or pharmaceutical grade supplements that decrease or completely tank your estrogen, it's like that's when the injuries occur.
Yeah.
That's where it is. Whereas now we've got a product that can actually help buffer the ratio, and that's what we want to try and keep in check, is the ratio between testosterone and estrogen there. It's like we've got a product that does exactly that from a phase 2 detoxification pathway.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's what we want.
And obviously smart products go with smart drug use, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. When someone's banging like a Boston Lloyd, RIP,
Yeah.
RIP Boston Lloyd cycle, pour some Treno for your homies, and then lap it up and inject it. But it's like, you play stupid games with stupid prizes. Obviously, smart drug use, whatever that looks like, is going to usually precipitate smart supplementation.
Yeah,
and I think that's
100%.
what we have here. So, Vivo HD. So the HD is RX'D.
Correct.
So if you go to HD at
That's
checkout,
10% off.
which is huge because they don't give out month to month. If you check, they might put out 15% off if you use the RX code on top of it.
Yep.
You're sweet. So to send them the boy, I know a lot of guys and girls that listen to the podcast have taken it and taken it in the past when I was affiliated from an athletics perspective. Let them know how strong the podcast is. Let them know the boys sent you.
Yeah.
All right, so we're done paying the bills for today. Is there a segue into, like, what are we going to call? I think we got to nip this in the bud because we don't know what the podcast is going to be called.
I don't know.
Because I'm worried if someone.
I still think we should go with like a Canadian, a Jew, and a South African walk into a bar.
Yeah,
or
it's better than
into
the
an
other one.
abandoned
Because
factory.
if someone else listens to it, they're just going to say racism.
Yeah.
So I don't know. My favorite part of the podcast that's worth listening to is your crazy stories from back in the day.
Yeah.
Like that's so like we talk about Marcus's family, we talk about the Holocaust, we talk about apartheid, we talk about Mac's early days and exposure to violence and as an ambulance and a medic, what was it, tactical medic?
Yeah, Thames medic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just sit back and try and rein it in. I go, whoa, okay, that's fine. But I think it's a good. I think it'll stimulate a lot of DM conversations.
I hope so. Like, the idea behind the podcast is it's just the conversation, and it's exposure to the perspective of all of these things, and like understanding, like, it comes up in there, but it's like we are so fortunate in what we do and what we have, and like the environments we're in now, because it could be worse.
Yeah.
Could be worse.
Well, and it's funny to be able to get perspective on, like, Marcus is Jewish. He doesn't hide it. We talk about that. We talk about his family's involvement in the Holocaust. But 2 days before we released the podcast, Kanye West was screaming about going DEFCON on Jews. Like, I can't imagine what that's like, growing up in a family that reiterates the history of Germany and Poland, and even into Ukraine and Russia, Italy. I think Marcus comes from a bloodline of Italian Jews. And one of my favorite authors is an Italian Jew that survived the war, Primo Levi. So, like, to be able to sit and, because, that experience of growing up around the dinner table and talking about your family's history, and I think it's actually really important. Like, just before we started recording this podcast, I was talking about my great grandfather, who I was aware of, portrait in our house back home of him. And it helps, like, explain, like, my sister's son is really big. And they say, oh, he's got obscenity. When I was putting that fucking table together, you're like, my grandpa, do that. So, I think there's looking in the past is a super valuable thing, and all my friends that are deeper thinkers seem to have, like, a pretty good finger on the pulse of their family's history.
Yeah. Well, it's the upbringing. It's the they made us.
That's it. It's a respect thing. Yeah, like, respect the elders kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's might be the biggest thing going into it, is, like, respect the perspective, right? Like, I don't know what it's like to be Jewish growing up in Miami in the United States that's riddled with anti-Semitism. Fun fact, not a lot of people know this. I want to say it was Yahoo, but it doesn't sound like Yahoo has the capabilities of it. Maybe it was Twitter. No, I know they use Twitter. A company tried to make an artificial intelligence communication system, almost like a bot, like a customer service bot.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, well, we need, like, it's just machine learning in a basic implementation like that. So, like, well, we need to aggregate as much data on human interaction as possible. Where can we open source this conversation as quickly as possible and as much as possible? Twitter. So they leave this machine running, as the story goes. And so they have kind of two computers processing this information and communicating with one another and sort of polishing the responses based off of the data inputs of Twitter. By the time they came back the next day, all the thing was doing was just spitting anti-Semitic remarks at each other, which is, the amount of anti-Semitism on Twitter alone. And this is like 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think it's gotten any better. No. So that was like, so what is that like to be someone who's in that situation, right? Like, for me, I don't really have a racial, like, I work in a broadly African American setting, right? And there's, like, unique cultural, and I grew up around African Americans, so it's like I can point out the things that are, in my opinion, unique to that experience. And none of it's, like, obviously none of it's bad. I love going to work every single day, and it's something that we'll talk about at work.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, that's weird. And it's like, yeah, no, like, I grew up in the South, and that's what it is. And it's like, oh, okay. And then with you, it's like growing out, oh, I grew up in the South though, right? South Africa. And it's like, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And I think, like, understanding the intent and rather than just the outcome, I think is something that's key in the conversation.
Yeah. I think that's it. You got to take it for, like, it's a deeper conversation. It's not just the face value. It's not a Jew, a Canadian, and the South African giving hate. It's the idea. It's like, it's thought provoking. It's having a adult conversation around these and trying to gain perspective. And, like, if that's what you take from this podcast, it's like you've bettered yourself, you've bettered your knowledge behind everything.
Yeah, I think there's always that question that went around when, like, Peterson was at, like, the forefront of everyone's thought of conversation that I always thought was interesting. Like, if you grew up, and I studied World War II history before I got into kinesiology, and it was something that was usually framed was like, if you grew up in Germany in the 1920s and you were 18 years old, guess what? You'd probably be a Nazi.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, you just see people going with, the other day we were at Target and we were trying to get out of the parking garage, and there was, like, 2 booms to get out, and you had to, like, pay to get out. And everyone filed into one boom, and no one was willing to risk it. So Mac took off on foot to actually test the hypothesis of like, does this? But it just kind of shows you like people are lemmings, right? They just run off a cliff.
Everyone just filed in, and like there was no one directing it. There was no indication that the other one wasn't working. And I sat there and like, why the fuck are we not going there?
Yeah. It was. I always think of the trials of Adolf Eichmann, where like, people thought he was this malevolent creature that, where they called him the accountant of Auschwitz, and he sat back with like what would be the equivalent hard copy version of like a spreadsheet and just ordered to death tens of 20s of thousands a day. In some cases, especially in the late 1941-42 into the end of the war, you're looking at, if you read what's the book, Ordinary Men by, I'm blanking on the name of the author, but they'll cite often days of 25,000 people killed in the day, and they put this guy on trial, and they're like, oh, this guy's just an idiot.
He just did what he did.
He's like, just imagine going to work, most of you probably work in a gym, and like, the equivalent of turning the lights on and off. Like that was as agnostic and apathetic a thought process as just crossing these names off a list. So it's interesting. And I think like when you hear perspective, because I mean, they're all contentious perspectives.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and honestly, like Marcus and the Israel-Palestine one, I didn't realize how crazy, because I had Palestinian friends that when I posted, I was in Jordan, I don't know, sometime in the last year or so. And I posted a picture because the driver I was with was like, hey, like that's Palestine across the Dead Sea. I was like, oh, sick. Like I remember listening to the news, Palestine, Gaza Strip, Israel, crazy conflicts. And so I took a picture of it and I geotagged Palestine on Instagram. Ooh, man, dude. Like, and I don't know, you curate your following to a certain degree, but I had some people go at me like that's, and I was like, hey man, like, dude, you weren't in the car to hear this guy who drove me for 6 hours talk about how every day he's got to look across to a country he can't go to where his fault. So they have a key to a house that they own that their grandfather built, and it's hanging over the fireplace in their home in Jordan. And he will ask you, or if you ask him where is you from, he will say Palestine. And then on the map, it doesn't exist. But to him, it exists because he sees it every day. Like, and that's where like I had such an issue. And I think that's like a lesson to go into this podcast with, is like anyone who was throwing shade in the DM is like, you even as a Jew, I know for a fact if Marcus was in the car with me, he'd be in tears like I was.
Yeah.
Right. And he would sit there and he would recognize for him that that's Palestine. And he wouldn't be like, well, actually, because of blah, blah, blah. And like, it's like, no, there's a human side to it that I think is so easily glossed over if you don't have those conversations.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
We
said, fuck it. This is a fitness podcast. Let's have a conversation about racism. Well, I think it goes to show like a common thread amongst all our friends. Deep thinkers.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
It's not just reps and sets. It's a little bit more than that.
I think so.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, I don't know. I think this is proof that it might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. I think I like going off the rails every now and then because this is an average Tuesday conversation with Marcus Leone.
I realized that. I came to realize that he's a special human.
He is. We'll have more of him on the podcast. We might get him on the Big Business podcast.
Yeah.
Now that we're 2.5 blocks from his office, which is now our office.
Yeah.
He's
and
nice.
podcast studio.
And podcast studio. Yeah. So shout out to MarketWise. Follow him on IG. So you have some homework. One, Vivo, please. Not any other shoe companies. Vivo. HD Muscle.
Yep.
And MarketWise on Instagram at Marcus Leone, at Coach James McIntosh. Coach James Mac. I've tagged you enough.
It's close enough.
Yeah. And then, at RX Radio, guys. Enjoy the episode. Lundy, hit it.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
You'll start saying that a couple times a day. You're like, oh, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
We saw a guy this morning coming out of Bell Harbor back over to like where we live. Like, he had like the Tekashi 6ix9ine starter pack of tattoos. No shirt on, like Instagram influential type chick in the passenger seat, all windows rolled down in the S-Class, just weaving on like, it's like the nicest bridge in the area where you're just like, if you're on that bridge in that car, you're not in a rush going anywhere, but
right.
This guy was like Captain Dickhead, just almost hit us like an inch.
Is your assumption that he does not live there?
My assumption is that he's a piece of shit.
You can fuck right off.
You can fuck right off that bridge. Like, bro, we just had a nice date. Like, I'm having a good morning, and now you're about to make me angry. Doesn't take much.
Yeah,
so.
I feel like he doesn't. I feel like he's just only visiting with behavior like that in a neighborhood
He
like
had
that.
a Florida license plate. He could
but
could
I mean,
just be coming from out west.
but Florida, like even the city of Miami, is such a mosaic.
You see that? That was a nice word.
That was
Such a nice
It's
word.
like you literally. I'm trying to be PC here. I do need to be mindful of who I'm in the company of, but it's like you go 3 blocks in one
Are
direction.
you talking about us?
Well, maybe. What always gets me is
PC and the company of
out in but it's also the internet. 'Cause I don't. The thing is, I need to neutralize this.
I'm
I
sorry.
know where you guys could go, and I can't be Eddie Gas on this because if I'm Gas, we're all canceled.
Listen, some pieces of the mosaic are not as nice as others.
Fair. Yeah. No, dude. Like, there's it's called Ike's. Ike's Convenience Shop is like just on the corner of the Grove, off of the 1 on 37th, and you're about 2 or 3 blocks away from some really nice houses. And Ike's, I don't even know what it is, but there's no discernible difference between the sidewalk and the street as far as the pedestrians outside of that establishment. And then think of that existing. It's hard to conceptualize that existing in the same country as Bal Harbor, Florida, let alone within a 30-minute drive and no traffic.
But at the same time, that convenience store is just as close to the most expensive homes in Miami as the place I was this morning in Bal Harbor is. There's basically 2 areas, Tahiti Beach and Indian Creek in Miami, most expensive homes in the country. It's like the Toll Brothers, the Trumps, Tom Brady just bought a house in Indian Creek, and you don't know about the people that live in Tahiti Beach because they're like incognito rich. But like where you're talking about Ike's, where I'm talking about this guy on the bridge, equal distance to like the most expensive pieces of real estate, probably in the whole country, or ish, vaguely. But
Yeah.
you know what? It's funny we're talking about this because like clearly talk about a dicey mosaic.
Yes.
Nobody would know that better than James.
Yeah, well, that's it. Our expensive areas are gated communities, border that of townships. So townships are poorer communities, makeshift housing, makeshift villages, if you were, and they're literally within a 5-minute drive, a 15-minute.
How high is the top and how low is the bottom? Because I'm always interested in contrast.
Like high in
Like-
terms of monetary value.
Yeah, so we talk about Tahiti Beach, which I've never heard of, and the anonymous wealthy, which is the biggest superpower in the world. And we're probably looking at homes in the 100 million plus. Okay, which absurd. What is the high? Like, how high does that ceiling go in South Africa?
Like within that gated community, like you'll have houses that are 40 to 50 million rand. So that's
rand.
okay. Rand, it's
$27.
You're 20,
I think that's what it's trading at now.
something along those lines. But essentially, like let's think about equivalent house, like a 6-7 bedroom house, like on an acre piece of land type of scenario.
And these guys have guards.
Oh yeah, full guards. They'll have full security systems, everything that runs, and then you'll have someone who made their house from Home Depot within a 10-minute drive. Like literally corrugated iron is what
See,
the house is made from.
I don't know if the comparison even makes sense because, maybe you could compare it to like the wealth disparity of Brazil, where like you'll have a mansion and then you'll have a favela where it's probably made out of similar stuff. But here, the wealthy, like let's say you're the guy who just bought the RX'D estate, it's 2 acres, $107 million, right? But then the wealth disparity between that, I mean, what is that? Like literally 2%? You could buy a $200,000 house like in the hood. I don't know. Somebody would have to do the numbers of like 100 million to 200,000, but like at least
Orders of magnitude.
Yeah. So like even the cheapest house here, you're still getting a concrete block house because the difference is we have building codes and like
Safety. Yeah.
Yeah, what always gets me in countries like that is the corruption. Like, that's usually how the wealth disparity stays so high because the people who end up with all the money make sure that those codes aren't in place so that things don't funnel downstream. Because that's what I don't think it is a fair comparison. Because when he's like, because even the top has guards. Would you rather have, now what you call like a family home of $1 million US with no guards and no need for guards as much as anyone could be safe in their own home, or have a $40 billion rand house and have to have full tack team to get your fucking Whole Foods every is that even a comparable playing? Like, there's too many dimensions that to put them on the same level to even compare.
Because the irony of this is I was driving, and guy on the bridge, he was driving the S-Class with all the windows down, and the first thing I thought of was our conversation yesterday. And I'm like, there's no way that if that dude is strapped, he's got some little pea shooter in there, and that's just because he's a wannabe gangster. And it's like the dude in South Africa who's rolling around with the windows down is doing it for a reason. Like, the thought never crosses your mind here. So there's not only a wealth disparity, but that's like an actual standard of living disparity and a safety disparity.
A threat disparity.
Right. I mean, you're not rolling around Miami Beach with the windows down because you're worried about your eardrums. You're just doing it because you're an asshole.
Yeah, pretty much.
In that guy's case. I mean, not everybody, but you get my point.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday. Just threat detection, situational awareness, and things like that. We were walking behind this. Sun was almost down. It was like 7:30. We were walking back from Target, just like two domesticated house cats. And there was this lady in front of us, and there was kind of this dodgy looking dude walking. So me, James, and the girl was probably about 10 feet in front of us. And coming straight at her was this dodgy looking dude, little wiry fella, hands in his pockets, hoodie on, a lot of sketchy shit, jeans, hoodie. It's Miami. You don't need that. And this girl seems South American, some descent. And as she recognized, it was really cool to see, as she recognized this guy and recognized his mannerisms, time of day, neighborhood was okay, but still, the first thing she did was she looked back to see if me and James were still there.
Yeah.
And we're like, holy shit. Because, I mean, especially him, he's got a nose for it. Just having to live under that much threat. But we both kind of were like, oh, that's rare. What we just saw, a female with that. And I don't want to go out of females, but and obviously we don't want to live in a society where that's necessary. But you'd rather err on the side of caution. And this girl erred on the side of caution. She's like, look, I don't care about political correctness. I care about me and my safety only. I'm going to turn around to see if those two dudes that were just chatting bullshit about whatever are still there, at the very least, to witness this, this character entering stage left. And I was like, wow, that was really the situational awareness. And dude, hand to God, 20 minutes before that, as we were walking towards Target, some fucking asshole guy, maybe he's a nice guy, I don't know, but he legit walked into a tree. We were walking down Miami Avenue, nice Northwest 2nd. Sure, he's probably a prick. Idiot. Because if you're not paying attention to trees, what are you not paying attention to in your life? Texting on the sidewalk, walking in front of us. And he, smashed it. Zinedine Zidane the fucking tree.
I want you guys to pay attention to the drivers. I want you to find a driver not on their phone. As opposed to being on the phone. Because, there's so many times a day where I'm just, why did you do that? Trying to understand the thought process of, I'm going to just speed around and perhaps hit you. Well, it's because you're on your fucking phone.
He couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Believe it.
No, well, because Australia has real strict laws.
They should, man. They should have those here because, and I'm not even being funny about this. It's fucking dangerous. There's so many pedestrians here. I've never seen that anywhere else on Earth.
The phone thing?
Not to the extent that I've seen it here.
I think that's an American universal.
Really?
And I would say you could probably argue, and I've said this kind of in a good light when it comes to Miami, and obviously this is especially with your background in EMT, but people commit real crimes in Miami, right? So the idea that some guy getting paid $45,000 a year is going to run up on someone on a red light, it's what? Or so you can get hit by a car who is also on his phone. You're going to pull off on the side of 95, some guy who's on his phone, and get smashed by another guy that's on his phone. It's mutually assured destruction. Yeah, right? This guy just wants to go home and nuke his supper. So he's like, fuck this, I'm out of here. Or he's on his way, whalers on, because there's a quadruple homicide somewhere.
Yeah, dude. I mean, yesterday, never in my life. And I'm like,
Can you play the scene out?
I'm just driving, driving through my normal route. This is the same. I just drive North Miami Ave every day. I come here to work. It's my office here. And now part-time podcast studio.
Welcome HQ. At MarketWise.
Right. So, I mean, it was like something out of the town. I'm like, I'm just thinking to myself, like, Jeremy Renner? Where's Jeremy Renner? Where's Ben Affleck? Wait, Jeremy Renner?
Jeremy Renner. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Affleck, Jeremy Renner.
That's the one.
Okay. So I got all the actors right. So I'm like, where are they? I'm just driving down North Miami Ave, and like where you went to Target, and like anybody who knows Miami, you go to Midtown. It's a nice area. Across the street, a little dodgy, but like you don't see armored trucks getting smashed up here. Like what fucking third world country?
There you go.
Yeah, it's like we're not in South Africa. Because it's coming to mind because James is telling me these stories about having to transport stuff, and people are actually hitting them on the road, and I'm like, okay, when have you ever seen an armored truck get robbed in America?
How
does that happen?
That's really because I've seen in Baltimore. I saw a pawn shop get shot up, but that's
for the course.
Par for the course, yeah.
Right?
If you know the Baltimore, the DMV area, but that's coordination. But I think that's the thing with Miami though is like Miami's history is crime.
That's what what people don't realize this because it's become kind of like a whitewashed thing now, but like. Miami was built on drug money. You can go back.
I think it still is.
It might be less now, but like if you go back to the 1920s, like Capone era, like sure it wasn't founded on drug money, but it partially was. A lot of the fuel that burned up in Miami was drug money. I mean, if you go back to this place, like when my grandparents came here, my great grandparents came here, and my parents grew up here, like. It was like a old folks' home, and then there was like, the fuck's that guy doing with a duffel bag? Like, he's going into the bank. Like the thing that put Miami on the map, all these condos and this glamour was really like South American drug money. This is where they laundered it. You wonder why there's such a high concentration of foreign banks here.
Yeah, they
got their start for a reason, man. Like, and I think a lot of cities have that history. You just don't realize it.
Really.
Well, not this. Okay, so not like the drug money history of Miami. That is very unique.
Yeah.
They figured out a way, and like you wonder why real estate is such a thing here. That's what they used to launder their money back in the day.
Makes sense.
Yeah. There was a funny story I read in a couple books about the history of Miami, and one of them was talking about the way they detected that Miami became a gateway for money laundering for the like South American cartels back in the day. Is that the Federal Reserve System noticed there was like a $7 billion liquidity excess in Miami, which means banks had $7 billion extra on their books in cash, as opposed to lending it out. Because, the only way that bank makes money is by lending the money out. But they had, so if you're a bank, you're like, I'm going to maximize my money. I've got $7 billion. That means I can lend that out. You make whatever interest. Back in the 80s, you'd be making like double-digit interest on that money. So they realized, like, something's going on down there. This is kind of weird. Then they figured out that all of the cash being put into the banks was from drug money laundering.
What footprint do you think that's like South American? Because it's odd. It's a clear divide in the country where
was or is now?
Because you hear a lot about the cartels, and usually it's more Mexican, right? Where I would argue that there's more Cubans in Miami than Mexicans. Is that a fair assumption?
I don't know. I would say you're probably right. I just don't know.
Yeah, because it seems as if all of like the word cartel is a unique word specific to Mexico, South Central America,
right.
Crime organization. Like the Hells Angels aren't a biker cartel; they're a biker gang. They might have similar operations and objectives, but that's when you say cartel, you're thinking of something that's first language is Spanish.
I would, I just wrote an article for MarketWise about this, about not just real estate, not just Miami, but real estate in general, like how the history of Miami lends itself to being a safe haven for money, right? And I think that's actually a lot of the world now. You'll see pockets of the world, and Miami's become more prominent in this, but you'll see people that are escaping political persecution, economic persecution. Like like, Catherine.
Dubai.
Catherine, my wife, she's an immigration lawyer. There's so many times where she's talking to people about coming to America. Like, I just want safety. I want like economic security. Like, I don't want to get hit just going to work. Like the stories you were telling me yesterday were just mind blowing.
That's it. That was part of the opportunity. It's like I got the opportunity to get out, and I thought about the quality of life. That's what you were referring to earlier as well. It's like you can't judge between the housing prices purely because like lifestyle factors need to be taken into account. It's like I carried a gun every day of my life. Now that's not.
What age did that start?
18. I carried a gun from.
Is that because you were legally able to carry one at 18?
Yeah. So a little bit of like a loophole. You're only in theory allowed to carry one from 21, but you can carry one from 18 if you get like a couple extra steps along the line. Do you carry one?
Could you conceal it?
Yeah, so it was concealed carry.
So did they have like a licensing protocol for that there?
Yeah, so it's a self-defense weapon.
At 18 years old, how do they justify that?
So I justified it because of my work, but you got to be careful because you can't justify it for work because you cannot. There's
what were you doing at the time?
I was a paramedic.
Okay, so it was the same.
Yeah, the idea was that I justified it that I needed my firearm coming to and from base because the base where I was in a township.
Oh,
so
okay.
I couldn't justify it for work because it's seen as a conflict of interest of carrying something that can kill someone when you work.
But you were armed on the job also.
Not at 18, but yes. So down the line, then I got a security license that then allowed me to be armed as a armed paramedic.
Okay, well, hold on. Can we run this back real quick to the obvious? Like, if he's 18 years old and he gets it for the commute, are you stashing that in your locker?
At work. So
no, bullshit. You're riding in the Ambo and you
100%.
got it. Okay, all right. That's what I thought.
It used to sit in my flight. So I had a flight suit and used to sit literally unholstered just in
the case shit popped off.
I'm hoping you had it chambered too.
Oh yeah, one up always
For sure.
That's
okay.
One up. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so there or like a little moon bag. Remember I was telling you about the moon bag? Bag for
so and a moon bag for those in the North Americas is what exactly?
A fanny pack?
Fanny
Is that what it is?
A moon bag.
Yeah.
I think they call it a bum bag someplace.
Australia.
Yeah.
Australia finds a way to just make everything weird.
They got-
Rice Krispies are rice bubbles?
Rice
bubbles.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
They got a name for everything down there.
Yeah, no.
It's a
They always abbreviate things, but are never in a hurry to get anywhere. What's the rush? Why are we trying to shorten these sentences?
And it doesn't save you any time. It makes some of the words longer.
Yeah.
It's a rebellion, like they were all colonized. Everybody, even the U.S., are all colonized by the British. You got to rebel somehow.
Yeah, this is true.
Queen's dead now. Now can we just go back to using normal people words?
I don't think so. I think they got another guy in place.
I've heard.
They've had this planned out.
So you keep the strap in the chest pocket.
Yeah, essentially.
Just floating around
Pretty
at
much.
18 years old.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then when do you have to brandish it for the? Have you ever had to brandish it on the job as an EMT?
I did brandish a firearm-like weapon, yes. So I
A
carry
catapult?
No.
Have you guys gotten into this before on the podcast?
No.
His story, because
I've some of his stuff, some of like the
his
more
story
EMT.
was epic, though.
Yeah, some of the more EMT based stuff, but not the tactical based stuff.
We used to carry what's called a JPX. So JPX was similar to like a firearm, and essentially it was a pepper or mace ballistics gel cartridge. So
Inside a gun?
Yeah, inside like a gun type device, and you would pull it, and it would launch off this about yay long type pepper spray cartridge that would hit you with a fucking crazy impact, and then it would disperse the mace all over that. So that worked as a nice self-defense weapon. A little bit on the grey side because it had a firing pin and it had a center cartridge, so it was kind of like you should have a firearms license for it, you shouldn't.
Guns with extra
Okay, so
steps.
let's run this back. What's the scenario where you're thinking like, all right, this guy's gonna get like literally smoked?
Well, so the difference is like what escalation needs to occur.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of what you have to run in all scenarios. It's like your escalation needs to kind of match to the threat that's coming. So the threat coming at you, it's like, is he bigger than me? Is he on drugs? Does he have a weapon? Is it a realistic type of threat? Sometimes guys just get full of shit. They're drunk. It is what it is. And it's like, you can't pull your gat out and put a bullet in his head. Like, it's going to end really badly. So you go through like levels of escalation. It's like maybe a mace, maybe a baton, maybe a fist. Like you've kind of got to see it has to kind of match to a certain degree until it's like a knife, or it's like he's bigger than me, he's going to hit a patient, like something along those lines. Then it's like, well, you make sure that your story is the only story that can get told.
Right. So in the scenario where you're pulling out mace, pepper, gel canister gun,
So that-
what leads into something like that? Just
So
personify that level of escalation.
You're working at so as far as I remember from yesterday, you're telling me that you work as a proper EMT, and then you're working as part of the anti-rhino poaching unit for the government also. So so 18, you were working as a proper paramedic.
Yeah, so at 18, I was carrying firearm and then the JPX. This scenario, we were over a patient, so we'd been called in for a domestic abuse. We were told that the scene was clear, so that like the perpetrator had left. He had not. He was hiding in the cupboard. And
Hiding in the cupboard.
like Harry Potter.
No, I'm not. The word's not. It's just, how did the police not clear him?
Well, this is the thing. It's like it's so... And this was like... There was a big movement at one stage within the EMT community in South Africa, like, hey, we want to carry guns, or at least carry our self-defense weapons for when shit pops off, because we are like ambulances, we were getting robbed, and they'd have like fake calls so that they come out.
Oh, shit.
And then they just hit the whole van because you've got $1 million worth of equipment in there.
Yeah, plus drugs.
Exactly.
You
they
got
were just-
morphine on there.
They were robbing you for medical supplies.
Correct. So
That's amazing.
And eventually what would happen is like some of the townships EMTs wouldn't go in. So now you had a lack of service because you weren't go because you had like bad apples. Bad apples were causing issues within the whole issue or within the whole thing. And so that specific incident, walked in, treating patient. She had
Cops on the scene?
cops on the scene, supposedly cleared the room.
Yeah.
Obviously not. Working on patient, dude pops out, starts running at her and me with a knife.
Yo!
Pulled, center chest, and the guy just flanneled over.
Jesus Christ.
The problem is, like, I hadn't really shot that thing before, and I didn't quite know the severity of what.
This is the pepper thing.
This is the pepper.
Yeah. Yeah, what's the radius here?
So it's supposed to be deployed at like 10 meters.
Okay.
That was pretty close to point blank.
Well, I mean, we didn't have many options.
Didn't have
But
any
what's like when that gel shit,
So
like you got a clear house, or what's the deal?
So that's the nice thing about it is it doesn't disperse like a mace can. It's very kind of contained, and that's why it's very effective at what it does. The problem is the amount of force that hit the dude that cracked his sternum.
Yeah. Well,
So now we have two patients.
right.
One lying on the floor with a cracked sternum, crying and full of mace.
Yeah.
And the knife in his hand.
We'll get to you.
Easy
We'll see
tiger.
as soon as we have time on Tuesday.
Yeah. So that was the JPX that I carried, and then I carried my gun. I pulled that once or twice.
No, hold on. He said pulled the gun sounds way interesting. Now, pulled the gun at the EMT job.
Yeah. So I was in the back of the bus. So I was back in the ambulance with a medical student. I think I had a medical student with me, and then I had my partner up front. And we had a psych patient who came. So we were just hanging out at like a petrol station, because a lot of times we would wait at petrol stations that were close to highways, and then if you got a call, we go off. So hanging out there, and this dude just walks up, and he's like, "I'm possessed."
Okay.
Like,
Great.
all right, what's
All
going
good
on?
stories start with this.
And it basically 45 minutes worth of, he's been possessed, and like he can feel it under his skin, and he wants to cut it out, and he starts kind of like self-threatening and wanting to harm, and now unfortunately we've now been approached, so it's now considered a patient. We have to kind of start treating it. We had to get cops to come in, because then what we did is we then sedated and landed up, or asked for a sedation and landed up for a restraint because of his state that he was in. Refused. So we had police come out, assess him medically, so assess him from like a threat perspective, and they said, no, we can't give us the right to restrain him, but I have to take him to hospital. So now it's myself and a medical student, female medical student, 21 years old, back of the ambulance. So now she is treating. So
She's a florist now.
yeah.
All right, possessed man.
The big thing from that is like, as we spotted, myself and my partner also used to carry at that time. It's like, as he came up to talking to both of us, like we both grabbed our guns.
Yeah.
Like, so I was holding mine, like I put my hand in the thing, and I was just like, this is gonna end one way or the next. Put him in the back of the bus, And now I said to her, it's like, you treat, because if something happens, I'm pulling and I'm putting a bullet in him.
Yeah.
That's how this is going to work. So he landed up like being okay. And as we got close to the hospital, he started like flaring up and like whatever, having an episode.
His possession.
And he kind of like launched at her.
Oh,
and I
God.
pulled. I remember looking straight at him and just literally I had a green sight on the front of my glove. And I just remember looking at square in between the eyes, and I was like, this is going to go one of two ways, bud. And I remember his face just look at me, and it's like that position was gone.
Yeah, the demon. he's like Joel Osteen. Yeah, demon, devil we go. Devil we go.
And he just straight back onto the bed, and he just lay there, dead still, while I just sat there. Kind of.
It's a funny thing the way demons work.
Yeah.
They're allergic
They're
to
a
green light.
fickle breed.
No,
9 mils.
They just don't like Austrian ceramics. You know, it's a weird interaction.
Is it common knowledge in South Africa that paramedics would carry?
So it's considered a dismissible offense. So you can't actually carry a firearm on the job.
Yeah, but like so by that logic, then if you went and asked 100 people on the street, do you think paramedics carry guns in South Africa?
They'd say no.
They'd say no. Okay, even given the state of threat that South Africa, because you brought up something yesterday about South Africa, or maybe probably you, that it was considered a war zone.
Yeah, it classes into the war zone category. Yeah.
Oh, so even by that designation, what percentage of the general population would you say is carrying a firearm?
Oh, I can't remember the stats.
But
More than you would think, and we actually have a very high percentage of female firearm owners. Like it's significantly higher than you would kind of come across.
I applaud that. That's actually because you were telling the story yesterday about the South American girl, and it's like if you've ever asked somebody from South America, like I'll ask my buddy from Brazil, like, hey bro, I want to go visit Brazil. What do you think? Like I'd love to go one day, and he's like, brother, don't go.
Yeah.
It is like
and
same. God, you got the impersonation, but like people that come from these South American countries in particular, because we're so exposed to them here. And it's like, you're telling me a very similar story about South Africa. Like, you're just living, like, danger is a part of your everyday life. And it's very funny to think about kind of the safety arbitrage, right? Like, you come to the United States, and it's funny how people here lose sight of how dangerous it can be in other places, especially if you go ask a woman. Like, hey, would you feel comfortable walking on the street in XYZ country? Fuck no, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And, like, men don't have that perspective. Like, shit, us three at this table, not a chance.
Yeah.
We're all big dudes. Like, you walk around like that, there's a good chance people are just going to pass you on and go to the next guy. But you ask somebody that comes from Caracas, like, hey, what do you think about, like, I have a bunch of family from Caracas. I was asking them at dinner recently. I was like, yeah, I might be going down there next year. They're like, don't go, you're going to get killed. Every one of them has a robbery story. How they got held at gunpoint, going to a hotel or going to I was going to the hotel, like held at gunpoint. They took everything. All my friends that I've known from Venezuela, they're just like, yeah, why would you ever want to go there? It's just that place they think is a war zone too.
What I think is interesting about the similarities in like a place like Caracas versus South Africa, and we were talking about it yesterday, is that it's not as fixed on race as people think. It's like it's more like haves and have-nots. So and that's where I think like that was really eye-opening to me, because obviously like I brought them up to HOA, a house of athletes. It's all football players. They're all African American. Like it's not a secret. And I think if you're traveled in the least, you can pick out the South African accent. So I bring him up into rooms. It's like, hey, this is my friend James. He's in from Australia. And then like he starts talking, and they're like, where are you from? And he just like straight Hans Lethal Weapon 2, like South Africa. And it's like, oh Jesus. But in getting to talk to him over like whether it's the EMT stories, whether it's the more tactical stories, the rhino stories, the fucking gun dealer stories, like the thing you can parse out is like danger is danger, right? And I think that's where it was almost like, I don't want to say a relief, but it's like there's just a level of disparity, it seems, that it's like if you have what they want or they need to survive, they don't care, which is actually really interesting, because a lot of people, especially on this side of the world, try and paint those places with some sort of weird racial angle where it seems like it's not necessarily the case. And obviously, like historically, that's different. But at a certain level of disparity, it's like they don't see anything but what they need. And whoever's in the way of that.
But there is definitely some historical lines in the sand that have been drawn. Like, because I was asking him about that movie, District 9, it's basically a movie about apartheid. It's a very interesting kind of look into South Africa because it was kind of an innocent question. Like, hey, do you think this movie was accurate in representing what's going on there? And you were like, you actually said yes.
To a certain extent, yeah. Just a more kind of like futuristic version of it is kind of what happened. Now, obviously, I was born just kind of before that, but it's carried through. There's the ramifications of it, etc. And I think it caused damage to the country. Of
For
course
those who don't understand, because I'm going to go off on a limb and say, in North America, I would say on average between Canada and the U.S., the percentage of people who have passports is probably no more than 20 cumulatively. And with the predominant number of that cumulative being American, I would probably drop it a little bit less because I've heard numbers as low as 10% of Americans
people in the U.S.
have passports.
Really?
Yep.
Come on.
I swear to God. But I think it's also an expansive landmass that for many other countries,
No, I get it. It's hard for me and you, all of us. We all travel a lot. It's hard.
Could you explain? Because I think a lot of people use the words. It's referenced in rap music and art and politics. I mean, Trevor Noah he's just now stepping down as the head of the Daily Show. He talked about it, and he released a really popular book called Born of a Crime. I think that's what it was called.
He's South African, right?
He's South African.
Yeah.
And now he comes from a mixed race family. What was apartheid in South Africa?
Essentially, it was the controlling government being more white based.
Okay.
I'm trying to be very political about that.
I mean,
Essentially, there was racism against non-whites. Is kind of as simple as it was. So whites had certain privileges, non-whites didn't have these privileges. To the point of you had to carry passports around. Now, a passport would literally be think of a driver's license, but you weren't allowed to go out of an area. You needed permission from your master or the person that you were working for.
When you say master, what do you mean?
So if you were a non-white and you worked for a white family, that family gave you permission to come into the whites-only area.
Wow.
So I mean, here's a weird contrast, and I think time scales really, like, you look back at history and people that are getting canceled by the morals of today on the actions of the past. This is going to be hard territory to navigate as three white men at a table, but I mean, slavery in America is well documented. And it just seems like it's South Africa is just I would say late to the party because it's obviously not a party, but like that checks and balances system was something that even in the latter days of slavery you never really saw. You know what I mean? Like,
I think that they are a pretty well-known example, probably due to some of the publicity it got on the international stage, but. That same type of apartheid has and is continuing to happen in many different parts of the world. It's not just racial. It's ethnic and it's religious based, and it's still going on. I mean, listen, you can argue it about a lot of things. The same thing happened to the Jews in the ghettos in the 1930s and 40s throughout Poland and Germany and,
China, the Uyghurs.
Right now it's happening there, and as a Jew, it would be remiss for me to ignore the idea that Israel and Palestine are not under some kind of apartheid against one another. I mean, predominantly, and this is not like, as a proud Jew, I mean, this is like more of a political thing in Israel, which is a very fucking tough conversation to have. But it does not seem too far off from the example of apartheid in South Africa. Because the overwhelming consistency amongst all these stories is the rule of the minority over the majority.
Right. Yeah, and that's it. I think when you try and define it, that's where you can lose the concept behind it. It's not a defining, it's not apartheid. It's that there literally is just a discrepancy between both, and that's
you call it whatever you want. You call it the ghetto. You call it apartheid. You put a wall in the middle and give them a territory, but
it's the same concept.
I've always felt like there's a more definitive meta principle between, and this is going to sound bad, but especially in this country, just from I'm going to say just a visual perspective, the contrast between black and white as colors on a spectrum or lack of color, whatever, to me, it's always it seems as if it's always fortified people around certain sides stronger than, and probably because it's just my exposure to, growing up in North America and being taught about slavery and things like that. But that was always, to me, growing up, until I got into university and started learning about World War II and all that, the black and white contrast, just because the language of it is so easy to understand, right? Like it's difficult for me as a child to understand two tribes, like, do you remember Coney's Children? Yeah. This was like a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's hard to get behind that because you're like, as a kid, you learn racism black and white in North America, right? You get exposed to more like historical, whether it's Mao's China, whether it's Soviet Union in the early 1900s, whether it's the World War II. But as a kid, you can conceptualize that easy. You see a yin and a yang, you're like, oh, black, white. Where then it's like you realize in some parts of the world, like Israel, Palestine, you're like, well,
it's easier to conceptualize because you can see the difference.
Right. Yeah.
Hence why the swastika became, and you wore patches. Like it almost gave it a visual aspect of you're different.
Yeah, tribalism is such a violent extreme that you can't ignore it.
And that's why I think it's easier to conceptualize because you can.
It's visual. You can't conceptualize it.
You can conceptualize it versus if you put two. I just don't want to say if you put two white guys together, one's Jew and one's Israel, like you can't see it.
Yeah, well, you can't see it, and that's actually to me the most dangerous.
Especially with him. Because he's the largest human being. Everyone's like, who's your Scandinavian friend? I'm like, I have a Scandinavian friend?
Right.
Who the fuck are they talking about?
The tall, blonde-haired Jewish guy in the corner.
Right. They're just
but that's it. So you can see how you lose that concept because it's not.
And that's terrifying. Because you want to go back and like, listen, the Holocaust is, for the Jewish people, the greatest genocide in history. But if you want to be real about it, 20th century was home to two other genocides that were by magnitudes worse. Like
Soviet Union.
Right. And that's not even touching the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution in China. If you go study the history of the PLA, Mao Zedong's entire philosophy on modernizing that country was engaging the peasantry into, or I should say, away from the old ways of farming and collectivizing them. And by default, like I'm butchering the story because I'm not a history expert on China, but I know enough about it to know that almost 40 million people died because of starvation. Because, again, same story. Rule of the minority over the majority in that country led to catastrophic results. You want to know what happened in North Korea in the 90s? And they called it the Arduous March. It's because one dickhead in power said, well, I know what you're doing over there. I know you guys know about rice farming. Your family's been doing it for the last 2,000 years, but let me tell you something. We're going to do it differently. Oh, that's weird. We have these floods every year. Oh, that's really bizarre. Oh, the Soviet Union just collapsed. Well, I guess 2 million people are about to die. And you have the greatest famine in the history of that country.
Yeah.
You go to the Soviet Union in the 1950s. We're going to get rid of political dissidents and modernize this country. Well, 20 million people are going to die. And it's just this. It's a story that repeats itself ad nauseum throughout human history, and it's like the black and white thing. It's easy because you can put them next to each other and you can tell the difference. Triangle, circle. Square, circle, whatever you want to call it. It's the same story.
Yeah.
And it's like the unseen ones to me become the most insidious because when you have two people, and I point at you and you're like, hate people with pointy beards. Point at James like, look at this, This is the ideal master race right here, and all of a sudden, it's like two basically identical people, and there's one tiny little difference. I mean, you could then extrapolate that to what God you believe in, what political ideology you believe in, but
it's basically slope.
The same person.
I mean, with its prevalence, do you think that conflict is inescapable? Like, obviously, like we
got 10,000 years of human history behind us that are, I think that's probably the established record of like modern.
Right.
No, I mean, how do you? I don't know if we're exponentially accelerating toward a scarier version of that because right now
the consequences are going to be greater.
Yeah.
Well, because the magnitude of destruction and the potential to destroy is greater. We've been fighting this invisible enemy now for the last. 80 years, right, since the dawn of the nuclear age.
Yeah.
And we're just waiting. I don't know if it's just a matter of time or not, but from the way I see the world accelerating toward divisiveness, like, I don't see us becoming any more unified as a culture on Earth.
I don't either. I think it's
Not
more,
yet.
No, it's more so you're always going to want something that someone else has. That's what it's going to come down to from that side, and it could come to that simplistic form. And because of the past, you're going to be preempted into one position. Like we know in South Africa, most non-whites weren't educated. So it's like then if they weren't educated, their children weren't educated, which means they were then behind. And that's part of like we have a structure called Black Economic Empowerment, and it's like a structure around the government that they try to help.
Yeah.
Right
In America,
the
they call
wrongs.
that affirmative action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the same. Like I think we're gonna we're stuck. We're stuck in a circle because of what's happened in the past, and I don't think
And
there's
does that system cause conflict in South Africa?
so much.
And then we get back to the
And
this is
it
the same
reverses.
story.
But
So
it's not
then-
even just, it's not stuck in a rut because, I look at it like we're all, you use the word like accelerating like the distance between, and I think that acceleration is just our personal relationship with time. Because we're getting older. Like the last year seems like it was a blink. And the last 5 years, like I feel like I've known you for 100 years. But I've known you for like 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit longer. But it's like, I think that feeling of acceleration is like we're all just circling the same issues. And it's not just the history of South Africa and the being behind. That's just the history of human beings. Like, I don't think
Sure.
Kanye West, White Lives Matter. Did you see it?
Of course.
Thoughts?
Listen.
Okay,
he
because
went-
this was an
he went
amazing
Def-
24 hours
He went
for me.
DEFCON. He was about to go DEFCON. I don't know if anybody on the internet can define what DEFCON 3
I
is.
thought that
but-
was your Star Wars things.
Well,
Isn't it a Star Wars thing?
no, that's the Death Star, first of all.
See, this is what I know.
Close enough.
Idiot. He was going to go DEFCON, which is actually like a level of military preparedness that the United States Central Military Command holds for readiness of armed forces. Like, all right, we're at DEFCON 1. Well, that means we're about to go to war, like catastrophic type war. But like, he went to the middle of the road of the DEFCON rating system to go against the Jews, and he got canceled. Well, I don't know if he got canceled, but he got a lot of backlash because of it. And all of a sudden, he thinks the Jewish people are. It's the same kind of fucked up lie that people have been telling in the media and racists that are anti-Jewish, I guess, for a long time. And I guess the internet didn't take very kindly to that.
It was just so odd because it came on the backs of, because I'm always, I don't know, I'm apathetic. Like growing up in Canada, race, Travis Hall was one of my first friends I ever had. He was a black guy. And it's not like you don't see it. It's like, no, he talks funny because he's from Jamaica. That's what you think as a 5-year-old. Then you go to Jamaica and then you realize you're the one that talks funny. You're like, okay, I kind of get it.
Right.
But it's like, I'm always curious of like the mixed reactions, right? Like, because whenever there's an issue, whether it's a far left issue, a far right issue, using a political spectrum, it's usually like if there's a extreme issue, it's the moderate on the side of that issue that needs to curtail that issue. Not the extreme on the other side to curtail that issue.
Well, that's kind of what happens, right? Like you look at, and I was just about to say this a moment ago, but you look at apartheid in South Africa, and now they have, what did you call it?
It's BEE, Black Economic Empowerment.
Right. Okay. So but there's obviously, that's controversial. And then if you look at the United States, you have affirmative action as a reaction to, the civil rights movement of the 1960s, also controversial here. You want to look at it on a very visceral level, you can look at Israel and Palestine. That was literally a united reaction to the Holocaust. They get their own land. Well, it's not without consequences. I mean, they've been fighting wars probably every decade for the last 80 years since they were created, and it's like, and this is all part of a big picture that you're talking about. We're talking about South Africa, we're talking about with all these different subjects. It's like you have a thing that happens, and then there's extreme reaction, and then there's extreme counter reaction on the other side, and then
So that kind of
my point behind this whole like exponential acceleration away from like sanity, I guess, is like there's a lot, like the loudest voices on the edges are getting amplified, and then the moderate voices in the middle are being drowned out.
I think the hard part is to use the voices thing is once things have been said, they can't be unsaid. right? Because if you've ever been in a fight with your missus or whatever, and it's going, but it's like, I love to win arguments. That's why I mean, I don't argue anymore because I've learned my lesson. But the lesson you learn is you're not ever going to. What is victory, right? Like, what is victory? Victory is you're fucking sleeping in your goddamn car. You're like, oh wait, I think I'm paying for that place. What am I sleeping in the car for? Like, I've won. I've claimed the forerunner.
Right.
It's like you're an idiot.
And it's just like backwards hat with like a cardboard
Yeah,
fucking
just
shack.
like
I'm the winner. It's
I'm the winner. But you fight for so long, you forgot why you started fighting. Because like the Israel-Palestine thing, to me, use the word visceral, and like nothing. I've never seen such a sensitive social barometer around a topic. It's pretty wild. Like, I've been exposed to the black-white racism thing on both sides. I was in the Bahamas once. Bahamian are, they're black, I'm white. I'm in a really nice neighborhood, just standing on the street corner waiting for a client of mine who's not white. And 2 black cops rolled up on me and were like, "You lost?" And I kind of chuckled. I'm like, "Oh, I get it now. Like, that's like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just sitting here." And luckily, they laughed too. And it was fine. But it's like, fuck, that's a situation that doesn't go okay. So I've been exposed to both sides of it. Obviously, like, BLM, not necessarily the organization, but it's the
thought behind it that actually has merit, because it's the same thought as like, it's very tough. I have a lot of Israeli family members, and it's like, if you were to have a conversation with some of them about like, okay, let's look at this from like a Palestinian person's perspective, because like my wife's been there. I actually haven't been to Israel yet, and I Jewish family, but you think about the person that lives in Palestine, and like think about their great grandfather. Like, these people, the United Nations came and they just took my land, and the British people were here and they fucked everything up and drew all these insane lines in the desert. And now we have this system where it is basically apartheid there. Yeah. Israeli people wouldn't look at it that way. And like, as a Jew, I'm also very sensitive to it because a lot of my family died in the Holocaust. And like, I get the reason it exists too. So it's a very sensitive discussion for both sides. But imagine you're a person just trying to make money, you live in Palestine, you have to go through one of these checkpoints to get into Israel. It's a traumatic experience, and I'm sure it's not dissimilar from what you experienced growing up too, right? Because I mean, what you just described sounded very similar.
But at a certain point, it's not about the land anymore. It's about the hospitals that get bombed. It's about the people that get killed in the streets. It's about the bus that explodes, right? Then it's a tit for tat. Then it's like, because in the background, everyone can convert, and they're still going to be fighting, right? Like, the IRA is probably one of the most classic examples.
Yeah,
right. The IRA is like, "Are you joking me? You fucking potato eating mix! Like, you guys are fighting. You're literally your own cousins. Like, there's no difference. You have redder hair than the other guy. You stupid fuck." I can say that because these are my people, but it's like, it's just so silly because that, like he talked about earlier. You have the baton, you have the JPX, you have a knife, you have this. It's like the necessary level of escalation, but it's like, man, he said it. Once you pull that and you're fucking green light on the demon guy in the back of your next move is full on execution, full on exorcism, right? But it's like, once you fly a Scud missile over a wall, it's like, what are you going to do? And even with South Africa, like, dude.
Yeah, because like a demon man is coming up to James here. Like, they don't know James is rocking a Glock in his vest, and like, James is not going to de-escalate. James is going to use the necessary counter reaction to subdue that situation. And imagine you're the same demon possessed guy, and now let's transform situations. You're somebody in Palestine. You are part of this, whatever you want to call this group. I would call them terrorists. And they want to launch a random missile, and they don't launch guided missiles. It's not like they're targeting like an Israeli air base. They're like, I hope this gets through the Iron Dome, and Israel's like, fuck no, it won't. That ain't hitting anywhere here. But the second that missile goes in, the counter reaction, it's like me walking up and punching Francis Ngannou. Like, I'm bigger than him, but that guy is gonna kill me because he's a trained killer. Now, you don't go do that unless you're prepared for the counter reaction. And that is where this whole tit for tat discussion just fucking goes off the rails, because it's like, well, if you're an Israeli and you're just a normal person and you're walking to school and a bus blows up, you're like, well, I'm glad I'm not dead, but I hope those people who did it get their shit kicked in. And then if you're a normal Palestinian person, this is where I'm just so in the middle in this discussion. It's like, if you're a normal Palestinian and somebody is launching a missile from your school, you're like, what the I just want to go to school. Yeah. And I would say it's probably 99% of the people on both sides, whatever the equivalent reality is, you know, like they just want to live their life. They don't want this insane, you know, conflict, but it's there and it continues to accelerate.
And it's such a tool. I didn't realize it, and I didn't know much about the conflict. And I've been close to it geographically.
Right.
I mean, I was on the border of Jordan. Most Jordanians, when you speak to them, when you ask them where they're from, they're Palestinians. Or you ask them what they are.
Right.
They're Palestinians because they got to look over the Dead Sea every day where they used to live. But it's like on an international scale. This is what blew me away about that particular conflict. Because I think to a certain degree, the black and white stuff, we have exposure to it in North America, so we understand it a little bit better, right? We understand slavery. We can see these two pieces on the board.
And it's the same with him, man. I mean, could you imagine growing up? I mean, that is a very clear discrepancy. Like, you have this white minority government, like, tyrannically ruling over a native population. It's not like this happened in some weird way. It's like the British just rolled in. Like, that's mine. This is our territory. And
see, the downside, and one of the things that not a lot of people will talk about, is before apartheid, we actually had a war against the English.
Did you? Really?
Yeah. So the Afrikaans had the Anglo-Boer War, which was the Afrikaans versus the English. So we fought that war, and then when we beat the shit out of the English, don't sue.
They're fine.
Anyways, and we basically they put us in concentration camps. We had concentration camps of white-only Afrikaans men and women, and women were raped and killed, and similar concepts.
So there was like a native white population there?
Correct.
Okay.
And that then came up from, so that we had that war, and then we had apartheid after that. So it's a lot of that story that not a lot of people know. So it kind of like ascended through the ranks, if you were in certain ways of this.
So what's your family history?
Scottish, German, and something else.
But they left.
They all left. Yeah, they all left
Africa.
for South Africa.
So you were not of British descent.
No.
Okay.
No.
And that's interesting because I would I guess incorrectly assume that a lot of the people that are there that are white now would be from British descent somehow, based on that apartheid.
So some of them are like from the Netherlands. That's where Afrikaans comes from. It's like Netherlands from that side when they moved. So that's
shit, I had no idea.
Yeah, and that's where this whole war kind of started. So we had the Anglo-Boer War in the very beginning, and then it kind of became apartheid, etc. That's what the stepping stones.
Does it just seem like one massive overcorrection after the next?
That's exactly it. And that's now what we see, and you were talking about it, like with that BEE. We just have this massive overcorrection where, I hate to say it, but like if you're a white male in South Africa, your chance of a job is almost none. Because you have a point system. So if an employer were to employ you, it's like you get them, if you are of a BEE status, you get kickbacks for employing a disabled black female person.
Which to me is
really
so discriminatory in itself.
Correct.
But it's a reaction, right? Like you had this historical event, and the reality of that historical event necessitated some kind of, let's call it reparations, for lack of a better word. But now it's taken to that. I mean, that's
so. But here's the
wild.
thing. So how long is that supposed to last? Because we're 20 plus years.
Yeah. That's the age-old question here, right? Like, when does reparation become revenge?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think here, for all of the faults of the American way of life, like there is, at the very least, access of equality, right? Like you have equal access to opportunity in this country.
See, I know plenty of people that would argue that.
I know they would, and a lot of that, and to argue my own point, at a very basic level, you have equal access to opportunity, right? But that does not mean that socioeconomically you will.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a fair
That's the
distinction.
caveat, right? Because if you see a lot of people in this country, you grow up on the south side of Atlanta, you grow up on the west side of the highway here in Miami, you grow up on the south side of Chicago, you live in the wrong parts of LA growing up, like you were not surrounded by opportunity. Now, the way I grew up, I was, and I'm very fortunate for that, and like, you know what? That's me speaking from my experience in life, but I see the other side of it too. You can't be blind to it. You grew up on the wrong side of 95 here. You're living in Liberty City or something like that. You might not. You're going to go to some terrible school. Your parents can't afford to send you to the private schools here. And like, who are the people you're going to be surrounded with? What are the cultural implications of that? Like, you're going to have a fucking tough knock at life.
Yeah. My only concern as I get older is that there will never be a solution. The core issues will always be the core issues, and our lifespan will just circle them, and we'll see them from different vantage points, and we'll see them with different senses of urgency. But like those core struggles will always be that, and hopefully to a certain degree, you can minimize how much that you have an effect or how much it affects you. Like obviously you got the fuck out.
See, I think it's more of like how much it affects you. You have control over that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
It's like because I agree with you. I look at this and I go, this is a forever and never ending battle.
Like if you ever felt, and this is because I've felt it a few times, and probably never in a life-threatening way. I've never felt because I'm white, I've been in a situation where my life is threatened because of that. I've been
100%.
I've been looked at. I feel as if in some instances, like I remember applying for a professor job at the University of Toronto, and I was going through that application form. I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm getting this job because I checked that very entitled box, right? Yeah. I hit all the high points of, the white male and all that stuff. And I'm not sitting here crying, I live the best life ever. But have you ever been in a situation, whether threat or otherwise, where you're like, I'm in this situation because of the color of my skin?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Care to share?
So more so, I got to think about how.
Like, is it like a violence?
More so from a violence perspective, and the consequences of being in that situation. I kind of played the consequences going through it. It's like I put myself in a bad situation. That was
by being where?
In a area that I should not have been.
And why were you there to?
So I used to employ, what can I say, a houseboy.
You can't say that. You can't say that. But here's the thing.
Wow.
Because I want to defend you for a second. Because just as the same way that it's wrong to convict people, like people's actions, moral actions of the past to today's standards, geographically across chronological. Right. I'm sure in South Africa, that's a totally.
So a houseboy is actually from Zimbabwe, and it is a man who looks after the house.
Yeah.
So he's the manager
just
of the
have a
property.
funny connotation.
Yeah, so it's more the funny connotation. So he was a Zambian. It is.
Yeah.
Call it he looks after the whole property, the farm.
Yeah, but he's like down with the family, he's family.
He's family. So
Yeah.
his name is Johnson, and like I looked after him. Like I know his kids. I've eaten in his house. Like he's brought me in.
Yeah.
His house being a shack, literally a corrugated shack.
Yeah.
So I would take him home occasionally, or I'd take goods or like food that I bought him for the family, and I'd drive him into the middle of this township. Not the smartest option a lot of the time because...
So you're driving him back.
Yeah.
And you guys are tight. Been with the family for a minute. Like, try and take care of him best you can.
Yep.
You're doing him a solid. You're in this township.
And the general rule of thumb is like, if I was going to do that, he would organize it that I would be okay to be allowed in and out.
With
So
who?
he'd have like a chat with the lads.
Yes, essentially.
So it's like like street gangs, or is it just a collective unconscious?
Collective unconscious would be more appropriate. You'd have just families. So no one's working. You have families sitting outside of their houses, kicking rocks and playing with whatever they found, and a strange white guy in a car driving a person who lives next to you home. Like it's not a safe thing.
Yeah.
It's like he'd have to kind of preemptively make sure that this is okay. And we did the one time, and one of the head guys wasn't around when this conversation had, and he came back, and suddenly I was there, and it became an issue. And I had my whole car surrounded with a whole bunch of very big, very angry, holding and brandishing some form of weapons of non-white individuals, all kind of like, oh shit, this is going to be a bad day.
Now
Got real very quickly.
In your mind, their frustration, consciously or subconsciously, was the fact that you're just white in their territory. Like, is that really what it comes down to?
I would go more so of has and I don't have. It's what I think.
Okay.
It's what I think.
Yeah.
But the problem is there's obviously the association. Once again, let's go back to it's like there was a stage where white people had
black people didn't have. And I think, and that is ingrained, and I've seen that beforehand to quite an extent. It's like, he has what I want. So we will
there's
make sure
probably
we get
so much historical
there's
context packed into your presence.
Yeah, there is so much in that. It's like that situation would not have happened if Johnson was driving with another black guy. I can guarantee.
Yeah. Now, how do you de-escalate that situation?
Johnson got out the car and sorted it out.
So he just
He quickly got it.
hey.
Yeah.
And they were receptive to that.
Yeah, and the next time I went through, I took a whole bunch of millipop. So millipop's like a rice flour.
Yeah.
That's a staple food in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I took a whole bunch, and it was just gift. Thank you.
Peace offering. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, but again, like, I think it's something about the contrast, like the actual the color contrast that makes that, and again, it's probably just my exposure to it, but that is always so, because that example, I put hockey, and you'd go to like First Nations, which are like Aboriginal communities, which are still in some parts of the country, out west in Alberta, British Columbia, some parts of Ontario still have it, not so much out east. And we would go play hockey. I remember playing hockey in this place called Wallaceburg, Ontario, and all Native community. The team, mostly Native Aboriginal Canadians. And we would have to get a police escort. Like, we're playing junior C hockey here. But we would have to get police escort to our dressing room and back. They had to cancel one game because someone was down in the stands from hucking glue in their coat. One time we went to a shootout and they were throwing pennies and quarters at my head. So you look down and there's screws on the ice because they're just hucking. But you don't hear about it. You don't hear about that. Like, it's always the black, for some reason, and maybe it's just where we live and the fact that, I would say the majority of media cycles out of like the United States. News cycles seem to start and end, and especially the exaggeration of news cycles. You watch something get reported in the States and compare to how they report it in the BBC or Al Jazeera network or whatever, and it's much more, it's sensationalized. But because I just feel like with the presence of the time and the sensationalism of black and white racism, it seems like such a powder keg, but I don't see it any more peaceful or any more volatile than any other racial interaction.
You know what's interesting? We got to zoom out real big for this thought. Is that you look at every writing, science fiction wise, pop culture, literary references about the future and the past. It's like humans are just, and maybe this is biology. It's like we're engaged in this perpetual struggle against one another, and it takes different forms, right? So like evil takes many forms, and it can take the form of black versus white, or religion versus religion, or apartheid government versus native government, or you want to go back in history, it's like the haves versus have-nots, and more of like a kingdom context. And there's a part of me that thinks that every species is going to contend with this perpetual cycle of violence and oppression, and it's going to take different forms through the different times. Now, I don't know what that's going to be in 50 years, and that's scary because I don't know where it evolves to from here. But we're still dealing with the most primal tribalism.
It's the Yeezys versus the Kardashians in 50 years.
Please.
Dude, it's not
Don't
far
go
off.
there.
It's not far off.
And like tribalism is still the biggest perpetuator of violence on the planet.
But
and
is that not what we're talking about?
It is exactly what we're talking about.
It's just
different forms.
Correct.
Right. Tribalism it'll take many forms. Now, if you're the Qing dynasty, the Chinese ruling dynasty for, whatever it is in China, it's like you versus the people, basically, right? But the counter reaction to that is the People's Liberation Army taking over and creating the People's Republic of China, right? So now we have this new tribe that's controlling 1 billion people on Earth. You have Israel, Palestine, that's one argument. You could talk about South Africa, you could talk about black versus white, that's another one, but it's just tribalism taking many forms. You go look at North and South Korea, ethnically the same people.
Yeah.
Tribe.
But
powder keg of war,
Yeah.
And it's history recycles
Russia,
itself.
Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
Russia, literally the birthplace of their people.
Yeah.
Right. And now they're suddenly Nazis.
But I feel like the perpetual conflict is and the goal of perpetual conflict is to fix people, not fix the conflict. Because the conflict will never change.
Fixing people can be a symptom of
No, but I mean fix the people in the sense of like, so I had this patient once And I don't want to identify him too well, but it's pretty easy to identify a guy who has white power tattooed on his forearms. So this guy, I didn't get too deep into the history, so did a bid. I think he went to San Quentin.
No, so we probably.
But like, it's kind of like that American History X thing. He lived that story, and like I've seen him, and I didn't notice until after. And I've knew him for years. We used to train at the same gym together, and never noticed it first nor last. Was always like super nice to me, and we'd lift, and he was go in, and he's exactly what you think of a single ply powerlifter, right? Mustache, big guy, construction worker, like a man's man, drinks beer, all that stuff, and didn't know anything about his history. We lifted a few times a week. And I saw him once leaning up on the counter speaking with this African-American woman that I knew. You know her as well. And he was leaning there. And as he was leaning up against the counter, and like it just came from church or something like that, and the lady he was talking with was religious as well. And it was the first time I noticed after probably 3 years of knowing him.
Where was his tattoos?
White power across the forearms. And I'm losing, I mean, internally losing my mind. Externally, like, hey man, like, how's it going? Like, in some circles it was common knowledge, but he got that fixed out of him in prison, right? Like he ended up, and this is sort of through the grapevine story, but he ended up saving a kid from an Amber Alert situation, where a kid was stolen, license plate of a Nissan, whatever the hell, blah, 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 last seen here. And he was walking out of work, and he saw it. And it was a non-white, I think it was a Hispanic, Mexican. And he went to the vehicle, retrieved the kid, had a conflict with the father who was wanted by the police, and he's like, you're not getting this fucking kid back. And that, like, to me, and nothing will level the playing field, but I feel like that was just the conflict that he had to go through. Because it's like, look, is it right? Is it wrong? It's like, yeah, obviously it's wrong, but would that kid be in a different situation if it wasn't for him? Would he have been able to look through that? Because I think it's perpetual, but I think the lesson out of that conflict is to fix individual people, because you'll never fix the conflict. They'll just find another conflict. Like, I've heard of these tribes in Northern Africa, Western Africa, where one translates to the people, the name of the tribe translates to the people, and the other translates to God's people. And they fight, have been fighting for generations, and it's the same shit. But it's just like, I don't know, it's the fucking Clippers versus the Lakers or whatever. It's like,
dude, but sports are such a great analogy for this tribal conflict. And in America, it's this hilarious, like, almost war-like tribalism, where you have your football team versus the next town's football team. You have your team marching down the field. You're going to beat them. You're going to score a touchdown. You're going to score the victory. And it's almost this, like, almost pseudo-military style conflict that we have as our American pastime. I think you're right when it comes to fixing the individuals, and there's promise in that, and there's hope in that. But I think that if you look at macro-scale humanity, is the cycle repeats itself. There's this really great Netflix series called Dark. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was the theme of the story, and it was like it was a German show. It was kind of brilliantly written, but like the history repeats itself, and history is a cycle, and what's old is new again. It just recycles and it reskins, And if you're like a Lord of the Rings fan, you go look at Sauron, and it's like the same story. It's like Tolkien put the zeitgeist of human history into that story, so to speak, and it's the same story over and over and over and over again. It just repeats itself. So I think on a big scale, the future, the present, the past of humanity is this cycle that does repeat itself. Whether that can be fixed is a bigger problem than I can answer.
I'd be worried about the problems we'd create if that got fixed.
Yeah.
There's the poison you know worse than the poison you don't. Like, I think sports, I mean, I love sports. It's a huge part of my job, especially American sports, especially football. But if it wasn't the Titans versus the Rams, it would be the city of Los Angeles planning a risk takeover move of Houston, Texas. That's what we need.
No, I know. And that's exactly that was my point. It's like we have these sports teams because, like, South Africa's not going to go to war with Egypt, but their soccer teams can play each other, and they'll have a great time doing it.
funny enough,
and then 7 people get beat up in the stands rather than 7,000
Right,
people
yeah.
dying in the streets.
But that's why apartheid got such good news publicity, because of the Olympic Games stuff. When we got banned from the Olympic Games,
I didn't know that.
so
Really?
we
I
weren't
didn't know
allowed
that
to, as South Africa, weren't allowed to compete in the Commonwealth and the Olympic Games because word got out around the oppression of the non-whites, what was occurring. We were banned. We were not allowed to compete because of the human rights justices that were occurring. And I think that's part of like how that why it's such a known.
Also very
Hypocritical for the
Yeah,
Olympics to
right.
crack down on you. Meanwhile, there's 78 bodies
we have
made.
this
in-
guy named Adolf, and he wants to host the Olympics. This was fine.
Yeah,
This is
But
okay.
honestly, man, like to bring Jesse Owens, that's
Yeah.
one of the most, and that's why I think sports are so. It is a battlefield.
Well, it was. That was. I mean, this is the most famous historical representation of fighting without fighting. You know, you go look at Jesse Owens running the Berlin Olympics in 1936 in front of Adolf Hitler, losing. All of his runners lost to this black man from America who had no rights back home, but he went and he upstaged the greatest. I mean, like military power in Europe at the time.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what was coming, obviously. But looking back at it historically, the irony of that race was profound.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you go look back at the Olympics over time, and like it has this way of unifying and also dividing, and also like bringing together cultures and different societies. Because I don't know if it's current or if they're still talking about it, but I think South Korea is supposed to host the games, the Winter Games, at some point.
So
And I think that North Korea was trying to co-host it with them somehow. And I know that it was in the news, but I doubt, logistically it could go anywhere just due to the problems.
Have you ever heard of the story of ping pong diplomacy?
Yeah, well, you know what? That was part of the movie. What was the one with Tom Hanks and? Oh my God, the Bubba Gump shrimp bullshit.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, Forrest Gump, right?
Well done.
Wasn't that a part of that movie? Where he was playing in China? He was sent to play in China?
Yeah, that's a representation
Right,
of it.
right.
That was a real event.
Forrest Gump, I can't believe I forgot that.
Yeah. Public Gump shit. Yeah, I think people might hear me saying that we need that perpetual conflict and it'll always be there to be apathetic to it. I think it's like however this interacts your life, it's the daily whatever that conflict is, polishes people, right? Like don't remove yourself from it. Like don't people, hey, don't say that word, right? Like someone might get up your tree about houseboy, but it's like you don't fucking know this guy. Like you don't know his intent behind it. But I think a conversation, like if you're, and this is where I think, race, and that's why, not that I can think of anything. I mean, there's things that I can think of on par with it, but I don't want to rank order atrocities because I don't think you're not in the business of hierarchy when we start to talk about genocide and atrocity and racial injustice and things like that. But it's like, all we know is the conflict is here. It's been here for a while. And I think it has such potential to like polish human interaction because of its seeming inevitability, that if you can, like, rather than being like the Kanye thing, which was like, you want to see bipolar on disorder, like watch his Tucker Carlson interview and then watch 24 or 48 hours later the text. So like go from the Candace Owens White Lives Matter shirt to the Tucker Carlson pro-life to the next morning tweet storm about DEFCON mid-range level, outrage.
Listen, in his defense, he only said DEFCON 3.
Right.
I don't think he knows what DEFCON is.
But also, I mean, you guys aren't sounding alarms until 2. Like your people have been like, they're laughing. Like you guys hear DEFCON 3 and it's just like, and?
Yeah, right. Where's the swastika?
Yeah, all right. You got foam runners? Get the fuck out of here with your foam runners.
You're
But
not
I
a
think
threat.
it's such an interesting. Like I keep thinking about a dude named Sin Martinez, Afro Brutality. But it's like I don't think you can fix. This is going to sound bad again, but I don't think you can fix it. But I think you can fix parts of you with it. The conflict will always be there to the lesser initiated. It'll always be there to people who lack self-awareness or perspective. But it's like I've had so many really good conversations and got to know people so well around, like, whether the conflict was race, whether the conflict was religion or politics. But it's like those are all just tools to polish people with.
Well, if done the right way and with two rational actors, I think conflict predicates progress. So, unfortunately, you go back and you look at the Nazis, right? There's been this systemic racism toward Jews for thousands of years. All of a sudden, this
Where did the beef start? Sorry to cut you off.
Well,
I'm so confused.
I
Was it the idea that you
Here's-
guys killed
no. Well, that might be part of it.
Jesus?
you
But
know.
wasn't he also Jewish? Dude,
He
I'm
was a
so.
Jew.
Did you know anything about this?
I don't know.
Okay,
either.
here's the beef.
Okay, this is the best episode ever.
Here's the beef.
Is it
and this-
kosher?
Let's ask my rabbi. If we can phone into Rabbi Frank. All right. The beef is that historically, I think in the Christian religion, Christian people were prohibited from charging interest on loans. And this is maybe just a small part of it.
It's money.
Right. So
all about
listen,
money.
why do you think Kanye has beef with the Jews today? Do you guys know why? Because I know
Something to
I
do
do.
with J.P. Morgan Chase.
No, they fucked him off right before this.
Okay.
Before this whole thing popped off, Chase apparently they severed their banking relationship with him. But I think that's because he was bad-mouthing the executive team at Chase, which you don't go after a $6 trillion bank if you don't want some consequences.
Right. Sorry.
Okay, but I think the historical precedent to this originally had to do with Christians not being able to charge interest on loans, and Jews could. So in the Christian faith, I guess according to the church, they were not allowed to charge interest on loans, but Jews were because they were not part of the church, and that was part of it. But beyond that, historical blame has just been it's been put on the Jewish culture for various ailments. They blamed parts of the plague on the Jews. They were, like in the Middle Ages, in the 1400s in Venice, there's a story that at night, even back then, there was a Jewish ghetto because they were segregated by the church. So it's really just systemic oppression of the church against the Jews. Obviously, you could see where that comes from. But they were locked in the ghetto at night. They had a Venetian ghetto in the city of Venice where the Jewish population had to live every night. And, this is the kicker, they were forced to pay the guards out of their own pocket to lock them in the Jewish ghetto at night in Venice in like the 1500s every single night.
So that's pay to be locked up.
Yes. And I know this because I just visited, and I visited the Venetian ghetto, where they have a memorial to the Jews that were rounded up and killed and taken to the death camps. I don't know which, it doesn't matter, but there's just and against the Jews, it's the one of the three major religions, I guess in the West, that has been historically oppressed. And when you think about it, Judaism and Islam, I mean, they're like brothers.
Yeah,
and same with Christianity, but they're all from the same place. They all picked a different prophet to worship. That's fine. Who cares? But it's just such an interesting history, and the historical oppression has always existed. And you fast forward to the Holocaust, and it all kind of comes to a head. And they blamed the Jews for societal problems. They blame them for controlling the media, which is historically, not necessarily inaccurate, but there's been a large majority of the Jewish population in banking and media and things like that. I'm sure there's an argument to be had there, but not to the level that it gets taken to. And then when the level gets taken to, it's like you'd almost draw that parallel back to South Africa, right? Like you have the minority ruling over the majority. In that situation, it leads to one outcome. And then when you have somebody ruling over the minority of Jews, and I guess this is a bit different than I was thinking, but, you lead to a Holocaust.
So does it sometimes, because I read some statistics about there's not many of you.
Not left.
Fair. But even still, like relative to world populations and
And somehow we're
secularist
the problem?
religions.
It's unbelievable.
But I just lived in the Middle East for the better part of a year. And the majority of people I lived in and around were all Muslim.
They're amazing people,
Dude,
right?
you're one of your favorite places to go is Dubai.
I love it.
I know.
And
Which is crazy. Because it's like, dude, your people already crossed the desert. Why are you trying to go back? What are we doing? It's so fucking hot there.
But you know what? One of my favorite places to go on earth is Istanbul in Turkey.
Yeah.
And secular on paper, but majority Muslim country. And you know what I found out when I was there the last time I was staying there? It's when you came to visit last year and we were there at the same time. It's it was one of the only safe places for the Jewish population throughout history. The Ottoman Empire was a friend of the Jews, and during the Spanish Inquisition, when Jews were driven out of Spain, and other places, I'm guessing, they found refuge in Istanbul. Because I walked from in Beolu where we were staying.
yeah.
10 minutes, not even 10 minutes, 5-minute walk from our place by Galata Tower. There's an unbelievable temple.
Yeah.
And it details the history of the Jewish population there. And they were the Ottoman Empire were friends. They welcomed them. You know, they gave them safe passage into their territory when they were being persecuted.
Which is, I think that's really interesting. So I didn't know that, but I know a little history about Turkey and Istanbul from staying there. And that became, Constantinople became the capital of the Roman Empire, which was the most Roman thing ever, where it's like, this isn't even in Rome. They're like, you're moving that's like the capital city of Canada is Boise, Idaho. It's like, hold on, what? But it just goes to show you what that inclusivity did, like what that tolerance and acceptance did. Like,
Well, it wasn't in Roman times.
right? Yeah, but it's just historically, because if you go to Istanbul now, it's everything. Like, Istanbul is the fucking universe. Like, you go down one street and you're like, oh shit, I'm in Nairobi. Like, go down another street, like, oh, I'm in Hong Kong. Right? I'm in the Mongkok markets of Hong Kong, and then you walk down another street, like, oh, I'm in Barcelona.
Yeah, and then there's a Louis Vuitton store.
Yes, I'm in South Beach, Miami.
Yeah, it is a pretty incredible place, and it's funny how there is such inclusivity in cities like that, and you can see that in a lot of places throughout history, like that somehow come together and protect each other, which is really interesting.
Because 5 minutes the other direction at the end of Iskatel is one of the larger mosques that you'll see, and the ironic thing about the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia. So in Istanbul, there's across from each other, there's a massive, what was once Catholic cathedral. And across the way is one of the larger mosques in the world, probably second only to the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I was just thinking Sheikh Zayed
But
bigger.
The cathedral is now a mosque.
Yeah. Well, the Ottomans took over.
Yeah.
Same time.
But it's so funny to see it.
Put the plaques up.
But the best thing about it is that they didn't demolish it. I love, like, the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque are so sick, are so interesting because there's almost like a level of respect, because when you walk into the Hagia Sophia, you're, to all accounts, in a church. Everything you know a church to be, a cathedral. There's stained glass everywhere. Like, you know, all they did was like, all right, we kind of like sitting on the ground. So we're going to fuck these pews off. But it's like, what do we do with all the...
Just put a plaque up, make it gold.
Yeah, that's what it, but it's like you could still see depictions of the Lebanon, classic, like Beirut, classic example. You go to what's called Martyrs Square, which the name could use an upgrade. But one of the second largest cathedrals in Europe is across from this large mosque, and there's just a center square. And I went around Christmas time, and it's just like, there was, you know, in America, we're at Walmart going, happy holidays. You'd have someone who's like, salam alaikum, alaikum assalam, and they're like, Merry Christmas. Like, I don't give a fuck. Yeah. And it was like that. But I think that only comes from, especially that part of the world. You want to talk about conflict? From generations of conflict, but they've just been forced to the table so many times. And they're like, all right.
You mean in Lebanon?
In Beirut.
See, the big question for people talking about, and I don't know if there's any South African precedent for this, but like, how do you create a one-state solution in Israel and Palestine? I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious if there could be one. I'm sure there's a lot of different opinions on that, but it is interesting to see places like Istanbul and Lebanon to an extent, and you know, maybe South Africa to an extent, where you have separation that is so distinct, and now. And maybe not separation within the country, because like if you look at Istanbul, for example, or Turkey as a country, that was separation from all over the world, people seeking refuge from political persecution. And to United States is another great example of that. You have different places all around the world where historically people have gathered that were oppressed in their place of birth, and they found somewhere else to go. Miami is a great example of this. This is, aside from New York City and London, one of the greatest melting pots I've ever seen on Earth in terms of diversity. I think New York probably has it beat to some degree, because it's just people from all over the planet. You can't walk a single block without stumbling. It's like, oh,
it's a different accent.
It was like, this is Kenyan food? I didn't even know you could get that here. But like,
there's a joke in there somewhere, but we'll leave it alone.
But it's fascinating to see the places that learn to live together And it's like Istanbul, I loved it because it's just, that's, the Silk Road is an example. That's a historical precedent. You have people gathering from all over the world. That is you look at the religion, it's like the culmination of that place being a crossroad for over a millennia.
Does any of that have to do with like a common enemy, common goal?
I understand. There's like a piece that comes with the
Common
enemy. The
goal,
enemy is
yeah.
thy friend.
So, like, for example, like in South Africa now, it's not to this extent, but like right now we have a very large problem going on with the country itself. Like the country is just run terribly. And you'll see a common like hatred for what's going on between any race, any previous conflicted groups that were there together. It's like,
But that's just a new tribalism.
So the government hasn't. But is it productive?
It could be.
Right.
I'm not saying it's bad, but like think about it in the United States. We had something similar happen in 2016. People rallied behind a political candidate that they believed to be fighting against what they perceived to be a broken establishment. Now, I'm not rendering any opinion on that, but that is the defining goal of tribalism in terms of political parties throughout the 20th century. Mao, the USSR, you have the fascists in Europe, you have certain political movements in the United States.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is fermenting there. Just happened again in Italy. Like where you have outspoken concentration of kind of extreme thought saying there's a problem, we're going to fix it. Now in the 1930s, fascism was a very prominent example. It happened in Britain, happened in France, or not France, I'm sorry. Happened in Germany, happened in Italy, and there was a movement in the United States and probably a lot of other places, but fascism took hold. And it's the fascism and socialism, basically the same thing on different ends of the political spectrum, but they're all rallying to solve a problem, right? So the common goal can be used for good. I mean, it could be a red herring, and in Germany they said, "Oh, it's the West and it's the Jews."
So what I'm hearing is we need aliens. Like to all rally around a common enemy of an alien invasion.
Independence Day is the greatest movie of all time.
I wonder if that would do it.
You know what? Because we're all just fighting over bullshit.
yeah.
But the thing is, we're fighting over the last salvo of the fight, right? Because that's the thing with like because if it may have started over like a racial conflict, but it's not that sustains it. Right, it's the hatred of the act now, rather than like the hatred of the individual. Like you said, like I'm going to sneak one in a bus on the.
It's either the last salvo of this fight or it's the first salvo of the new fight because the means of destruction are so much more destructive.
Yeah,
right.
like I think the way out of this is like some sort of hyper modern interterrestrial warfare. Like we look up one day and there's like a craft the size of Lower Manhattan floating over us, and everyone's like,
Independence Day.
Look, let's worry about this first. I'll hate you after this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we either need, number one, ideally it's an Armageddon scenario. Listen, Bruce Willis is out. He can't help. But, we need an asteroid coming or an alien coming and saying, like, listen, we don't know what to do with this, but let's put aside the bullshit. We're going to go fight this thing. Most of us are going to die. We'll solve the black-white, square nose, round nose discussion once we're done with this whole thing.
Asteroid would be nice.
I think asteroid's an easy one.
It's a quick way to go.
I think it's also a dispassionate one.
Yeah,
it's an inanimate. I think an inanimate one is big.
This
right?
is the universe saying, your time has come.
Yeah.
You people are up to no good down there. We're going to sort this out.
You can fuck right off.
Yeah, you can
fuck right off. And on that note, we're going to wrap it there.
That's probably
Marcus Leone, MarketWise. Appreciate you having us in your home base.
Welcome to
I live here now.
Your new part-time studio.
So, yes, you're going to be a co-host, co-feature.
Okay.
We're on the show.
Thank you.
And James Mack also lives here. But yeah, good times. I always like talking. You two specifically needed to get in a room, and I'm glad I could facilitate that and put microphones on your head because, like, both have very interesting and familial and self experience with racism, which is not something that people look at two white dudes and think, I'm sure they have an enlightened perspective. And I'm just here to talk about aliens.
Before we go, you said something very interesting yesterday. It's like because of my stature, like I probably never experienced, like I've been to all over the world now.
Yeah.
I've been to North Korea and Tibet and China and the Middle East and, all over Europe, East and West. And it's like Africa and the North. Like I've never really experienced that kind of threat like you guys,
You're
probably
referring
you
to-
have more than anybody. Like, I've never been in a situation where somebody's actually threatening me. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on life in like actual danger, as opposed to like we create such ridiculous problems in the West.
This guy in his fucking S class at Bal Harbor this
Right.
morning. I was going
Like-
to shoot out his goddamn tires.
I would never. But like, that's such a funny thing to get angry about. It's like I just know that I'm not actually angry about it. I just think it's like, oh, here's today's clown, you know.
Yeah.
But you and the way you grew up and the way you've lived your life up until you just came here, it's like there's actual danger all
it's-
over the place.
We've spoken about this. It's just the perspective. It's like I now just have levels, and it's I'm not going to worry about it, or it's the end. And that's kind of like that's where it's got to for me, which
people,
is
but
not
people
good.
should have that, at least the knowledge of the perspective, right? Because like, what are we talking about here? Talking about going DEFCON 3 on the Jews, like. What problems
Twitter
are you
storm.
Yeah,
It's a Twitter storm.
Right.
That's how it's going to. That's how bad it's going to be.
What problems are we creating that like don't need to happen?
Yeah, I mean it's Sisyphean, I think, in its origin, right? Like this country gets so comfortable because, and I think part of that is the parlaying for endless resources for all, without just accepting that it's like, look, there's just always going to be differences. Because now it doesn't. The more available the resources are, the more trivial the conflict is, because conflict in itself isn't trivial.
Yeah,
it's
like-
ever present. It's omnipotent, and well, it's not omnipotent, but it's omnipresent. Like when I went to Kenya, they didn't give a shit. Like they didn't, and like the tribe that went, and this is like the thing with where you grow up, and when you go to parts of Africa, at least the parts that I've been, we grow up and we watch these World Vision commercials where there's like, in the wings of an angel, and there's just like some kid carrying water, and you're like, oh, fuck my allowance, I need to. But then you go there, and they're like, they have an economy based around tourism, right? No different than if you go to Mexico or things like that, but they can leave. Like there's and this is where
The little kids in Africa can leave.
no, like the families can go to school in, like I went into a village surrounded by a bunch of sticks in mud huts that the women make that are no more than 5 feet tall. And it's like they get sent to school and they come back. They'll go to Nairobi, they'll go to Mombasa, and they'll go to school. And you know what? You respect the hell out of it when you see that they don't have any of this. The conflict is with the land. The conflict is with, people, or not even people, like lions trying to eat their cows or some shit. Like they're good at that level of the hierarchy. I think they get a look at it and they go, oh, you guys are completely lost your mind. I'm going to go remove my bottom teeth, speak Swahili, drink cow's blood because that's sane. And you know what? I think they're absolutely fucking right.
Yeah, they're probably not far off. You create a lot of problems when you're too comfortable. It's like you see a billionaire starting a war with just nonsensical stuff. They're like, bro, you got shoes to sell. Like,
Yeah.
this is not on the hierarchy.
Yeah. Sell books, Bezos, Gates, fucking, make a better operating system. Like it doesn't. But again, like you need that conflict. So I think some people just realize that there's still so much growth at every level of conflict that producing more goods, acquiring more land just means you're acquiring a greater necessity for conflict. So I think conflict is just trying to push you into that realm of self-discovery where it's like, look, this conflict is here to polish you. It'll always be here. Whatever the next horizon is, if you don't fix that, we'll make a new one for you.
Or
Right?
Oh, asteroid.
Asteroid aliens. I think
been
we've solved it.
All right.
Israel, Palestine,
I'm team
Russia,
asteroid.
Ukraine,
Humanity's
apartheid,
doomed.
South Africa,
Fuck it.
west of the
Humanity's doomed.
95. We've solved everything.
Yeah. All right. So
Asteroid.
2024, huge asteroid.
Yeah.
That's what we're voting for.
Congrats.
Appreciate it.